Leveticus. Elijah loved being at church, so did George and Sally, of course. But Elijah loved being at church for the same reasons he loved being in the forest with the trees. He absolutely loved to light candles in the back of the church and to talk to St. Mary. He called her Mama. If you are his Mama, that somehow makes you my Mama too. The logic was quite simple. He would tell her all about his week, the good, the bad, the ugly. Of course, he couldn't look at her straight in the eyes when he was talking about the ugly. But then again, Elijah's ugly, well, wasn't anything like the ugly of the children his age. Mama, yesterday I went to school and I just wanted to be alone. I wanted to be quiet, remember? Joshua came to me and I just wanted to be alone. I feel bad because I was not being a good listener. My teacher always tells us that we should practice our listening. She says big ears, little mouths. To be honest, Mama, I think she just wants us to listen to her. I think she has small ears and a big. Oh, sorry, Mama. I don't mean to complain. I love Madame Laurier. Well, I had a little mouth with Joshua, but I also had little ears. I think he was sad that I didn't want to play with him. Mama, do you ever like being quiet? Do you ever feel like being alone with your son? When you do get a second alone with him, can you please say hi to him? Tell him that I really can't wait for Christmas. I am sorry about Joshua. I'll try to play with him tomorrow. Mama, thanks for always having big ears. Oh, that made you smile. I love making you smile, Mama. Do you remember how last week I was going to? Elijah, George whispered, enough playing with the candles. Be respectful. What are you smiling at? Do you know who you are talking to? That is the Theotokos. You light the candle, you bow your head, you ask her to pray for you, and then you come in and stand with me. It's not right to stand here and play with the candles. You can do whatever you want after liturgy, but now you are in church. What started as a whisper ended more like a low grumble of a yo. By the time George was done, Elijah had already slipped in a wink and a goodbye wave to the Theotokos. He followed his dad down the church center aisle and tried to avoid the red three-point line that was drawn on the floor. He was okay with walking on the dark blue volleyball lines, but not the red ones. Red lines are fire, thought Elijah. The Coptic people rented school gyms for a good part of the 80s to use for their liturgies. Coptic history in Canada is complicated. The first Coptic priest came to Canada in 1964, having been ordained by Baba Kyrillos. Abuna Marcos actually was the first Coptic priest in North America by the late 70s. Coptic churches were sprouting up in many of the cities in Ontario. Most of these, like Elijah's church, were praying in school gyms. Oh, how the Coptic people loved their churches. They couldn't see the basketball rims hanging over the altar or the school championship banners on the walls. The row of chairs in the front carrying the printed paintings of the saints was transformed in their hearts into the most majestic iconostasis. The moment Abuna used the censer and the incense started filling the rows of metal fold-up chairs, parishioners were transported back to the mother church in Egypt. The jinn was no more. The church was so much more than a gathering of believers. The church was the only connection that Coptic immigrants in Canada had with each other. It was their church, their community hall, their social club, their place of rest. Where else could they speak Arabic while eating a bide and basturma sandwich in fresh pita bread? All difference in opinion and point of view were dissolved as the elders sat around after liturgy on the same metal chairs turned into circles. The tantes were behind the tables selling the sandwiches while the uncles were drinking their coffees. And remembering Egypt, often they would share tips on how to survive the winter, where the best fowl beans were sold, and how well bad the deacons did in the liturgy. One thing was sure, they were Coptic, and they had traditions to maintain. Cairo, don't you gum after liturgy. Miriam, don't cross your legs in church. Mary, cover your head. Liturgy is still happening. Mena, stand up. The gospel is being read. Philo, go tell Abuna that you drank a sip of water after midnight. Make sure you tell him before you have communion. Stephen, take your shoes off before communion. Elijah was fully aware of the importance of these traditions. Every week in Sunday school, these traditions were gently reiterated. However, Elijah especially loved the stories of the saints. Minna was by far his favorite, after Mama of course, but there can never be any comparison. She was the mother of God. He loved Minna. He loved his two camels too. I bet their names were Kami and Kamu, Elijah thought while standing next to his dad in liturgy. He thought he would ask Uncle Ansi if he knew the camels' names. Uncle Ansi was his favorite uncle in the church. He was different. For some reason, he never seemed to bring up all the traditions and never felt the need to remind him of the rules. Uncle Ansi always glowed after communion. Elijah watched him week after week close his eyes after receiving the Eucharist. He watched as his eyebrows furrowed, and his facial expression looked like he was pleading with someone. Elijah knew from experience that at some point his face always relaxed. His eyebrows would settle, his cheekbones would slowly rise, and a small smile would change the landscape of his face. He wouldn't open his eyes till he felt the water sprayed liberally by Abuna on his face after liturgy. But even then, it seemed like his eyes were still looking somewhere beyond. He would quietly gather all the things on the altar into a suitcase. Uncle Ansi reminds me of someone, Mama. Who does Uncle Ansi remind you of? Maybe he reminds me of Minna. That's it, Minna, Uncle Ansi reminds me of you. I am sure you were just like him, right? It is so much easier to speak to saints. You can switch from one saint to the other in mid-sentence. My sweet Elijah, did you hear the gospel today? Tell me. What did the Lord tell you today? No matter what Elijah answered, Uncle Ansi always would encourage him to listen to the Lord. Elijah always noticed how Uncle Ansi's eyes looked down any time he said the name of Jesus, kind of like a grade 8 girl who mentioned the name of the boy she had a crush on. I want to be like Uncle Ansi when I grow up. He is so special. Week after week, George, Sally, and Elijah went to church. For Elijah, the people at church were very much like the trees of his beloved forest. Each tree had a different texture. Each tree had its marks left by the robins and the squirrels. Each tree had its story. For Elijah, each person was unique. He loved each person with their stories and their scars. He loved to hug the trees at his church too. Sometimes he could feel their pain or their joy, and though he was only 6, his heart would weep. But of all the trees, he especially loved the ones who would show up in liturgy and would hover over the altar. They were special like Uncle Ansi was special.